Hi, good evening, and welcome to the Race Identity-Based Data Evening. What we are going to be doing is going through our strategy. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that our chair of our Police Services Board, Don Robertson, is here. And it's very important that we also have members of our organization throughout the audience, because this is something that we believe is very important to our organization. What I'm constantly reminded about is when we're looking at the journey of being able to better articulate how we respond or what we do, we're reminded in real time when we're producing our use of force data and we're talking about the challenges out of 219,000 interactions in 2023. What we witnessed was 265 use of force incidents, which is 1/10 of 1%. It's not a matter of saying, okay, that's pretty good. What it is what does the data say? What does the data talk about, in fact, about disproportionality or disparity in certain communities and the involvement? And what we have done in this journey is started to tackle that. Having joined policing 43 years ago, I can tell you that I am fully aware that in many instances there have been inquests, there's public inquiries, there's commission reports. There are multiple reports that have said during my tenure in policing in the 80s and the 90s and up till today that do talk about policing is required in community situations, but professional policing is what is expected in those interactions. It doesn't lost on me that we have to serve and protect in partnership with our community. And that community partnership is the cornerstone to the trust that we have in this strategy. The strategy also is something that's more than just a bunch of words that is put on a printed packet or giving you a UR code to be participant. It is actually a strategy that is going to be working hand in glove with our community. And more importantly, we also have members here from our community advisory panel who've also put their hand up to make sure that they have that critical eye and they have that ability to let us know when we're going left, when we should be going right. So it's very important. I want to acknowledge that they're here as well. So what we are hoping to do this evening is we'll be introducing the approach to the strategic plan that speaks specifically what will be our approach. What we've seen, and I've seen also with my peers, is that there have been chiefs of police that quite freely want to be on the front of the Toronto Star or their local newspaper taking a knee. And that is what they consider demonstrating to a community that we can do better. Well, it's not about taking a knee. It's about actually rolling up your sleeves and making sure that you have that commitment and that understanding is that it's a long journey, but it's an important journey. And I'm very pleased that as we continue here, and for those at home, we are building up now, and I will shout very loudly when we break 50 people who are here. So welcome this evening. I will be turning it over to Ala. Ala is going to be doing the land acknowledgement. Throughout the evening, there is going to be that learning component. I know that both Jim and Chloe and Daniel will be walking us through the mechanics of the strategic direction and plan that is going to be our path. In March of this calendar year, next month, we'll be going to our Police Services Board meeting as well and presenting this. So then you are our first opportunity to share that with you. So thank you very much. So how many from Waterloo came down here tonight? 5 of you, okay, well, and there's 3 more at the bus stop that didn't get here as well. So thank you very much to our Waterloo Police Service partners as well. It's been a year since we last spoke, and we spoke up at the Marriott, and what a great evening that was as well, to talk about this journey that is not just being taken by the Hamilton Police Service, but is becoming a responsibility and Ontario human rights, as well as anti-racism, to make sure that we can articulate our path. So without further ado, Ala, I have to turn to you for the land acknowledgement, and then we'll get going, and we'll also be available for some good Q&A later on, okay? So welcome this evening.
Thank you. Perfect. Hamilton Police Service is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas. This land is covered by the dish with one spoon, won the Mud Belt government, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the between the Lakes Purchase, 1792, between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Hamilton Police Service honors with gratitude this discarded land, which from the time immemorial has been and is home to many Indigenous people from across the Turtle Island. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, known as North America, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. As we hear and we say the land acknowledgement in many events, I would like to share my personal commitment to the truth and reconciliation, as I believe that reconciliation is not just an acknowledgement, but an action. This starts through learning in our own ways to create inclusive spaces that respect and honor Indigenous voices, histories, and cultures. In my journey as an educator, mother, residents of the city of Hamilton, I am Sharon and would like to ask that you have a moment to reflect on your journey of truth and reconciliation. Hello and good evening. My name is Ala Mohammed. I'm the Community Engagement Lead with Hamilton Police Service, and it's an honor to welcome you all to the Hamilton Police Service commitment to equitable service, a race and identity-based data strategy presentation. Thank you for being here in person, and I see people come on in and join us at the front. And I would also like to welcome those who are joined us virtually. Please note, this session is being recorded. We also have our victim services team here for support, if anyone has any questions. And we also have our RIBD team that I would like to welcome. You can just say hello if that's okay with you. Inspector Calendar. Yep. Inspector Rashford. Yep. Staff Sergeant Hashimoto. Yep. Manager of Analytic Chloe Nitrick. RIBD Analytical Daniel Munsa. Yep. EDI Specialist Rahim Semani. And myself. Now I'd like to call on Chloe.
You can. We're actually going to start with me. And thank you for joining us this evening. And we're going to start with why do we need an RIBD strategy? And I'm going to start with something very simple, but something very important. And that's, why do people become police officers? Why do we put on this uniform? Why do we take an oath? And why do we commit to this work each and every day? At its core, policing is about service. It's about helping people. And every officer who joins this profession attempts every day to make a difference in their community. But that difference only has value if it's equitable. It must be fair, and it must reach every person in every neighborhood in the same way. We can't assume that it's happening just because we have good intentions. We have to ask ourselves, are we serving everyone equally? Are we building trust in all communities? Are we upholding the responsibility to protect and support everyone, regardless of their race, their identity, or their background? The answers to those questions don't come from assumptions. They come from data. That's why we need a race and identity-based data strategy. It's not about collecting numbers to collect numbers. It's about ensuring that policing reflects our values of fairness, accountability, and transparency. It's about making sure that when we say we serve everyone, we have the evidence to back that up. And when we're failing, we recognize that we need to fix it. It's not about compliance or reporting numbers. It's about action. When we look at the data and we see disparities, we have to ask why, and more importantly, how do we take action? Tonight marks a significant step in that journey. With the launch of Hamilton Police Services Race and Identity-Based Data Strategy, we are committing to more than just collecting information. We're committed to meaningful change. We're committed to listening, to learning, and taking action where it is needed. Because at the end of the day, policing is about people. And every person in Hamilton deserves to feel safe, to feel respected, and to feel supported by their police service. That's why we're here, and that's why this work matters. So how did we get here? In June 2017, the Ontario Racism Act was passed in legislature, followed closely by the Ontario Anti-Racism Data Standards in 2018. The Act was established to strengthen government's ability to identify and combat racism in policies, programs, and services, and build a fair society where everyone's provided equal opportunity. In 2019, the Anti-Racism Act and its associated regulation and guidelines require the Ministry of the Solicitor General to collect and analyze race-based data in police use of force. These data sets include information extracted from provincially mandated police use of force forms. In 2020, the Hamilton Police Service began reporting on race-based data and their use of force board representations. By 2023, it became clear that simply reporting race-based data without meaningful follow-up action was not enough. Recognizing this, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police resolved to take further steps, initiating the development of a framework to help police services build a race and identity-based data strategy. The Hamilton Police Service received this framework in the late 2023 and launched on our strategy journey, forming an internal working committee and hosting our first RIBD strategy committee in February of 2024. In June 2024, the Hamilton Police RIBD Community Advisory Panel, or what we like to refer to as the CAP, was established, and you'll hear more about them later tonight. Over the past 8 months, the CAP has worked diligently to help lay the foundation to our strategy. We recognize that a strong foundation is essential for sustainable progress, which brings us here today. Systemic racial bias exists in many Canadian institutions, and law enforcement is no exception to that. For years, racialized communities have had more frequent interactions with police, often in ways that cause harm or create mistrust. The Human Rights Report on Eliminating Racial Profiling from Policing states the first step to fixing this issue is recognizing it. This is key to rebuilding trust and making policing more equitable. Systemic racial bias is often caused by policies, practices, and procedures that appear neutral but have the effect of disadvantaging racialized groups. It can be perpetuated by a failure to identify and monitor those racial disparities and inequities, and to take the remedial action that's necessary. The RIBD strategy will help us identify differences in how we interact with people and determine if they are related to race and identity, and allow us to take action to address them. The HPS and the community must work together in a sustained and meaningful way to address these inequities. By fostering ongoing collaboration, we ensure our approach remains impactful, community-driven, and built to last. Achieving equity requires continuous communication, commitment, and a shared responsibility from all involved.
Our vision at the Hamilton Police is committed to building and executing a strategy that strives for a police service that is free of discrimination, where everyone, community and membership, feels respected and valued. A year ago, we began developing the race and identity-based data strategy with a commitment to do this alongside community via an advisory panel. Strategies are often these high-level goals that we're all achieving. And last year, when we decided that we would have an information session, we knew it was the right step to bring our community as part of that development. We recognize that, like policing itself, our relationship with the community is dynamic, requiring engagement and adaptability. Our goals with this strategy is to provide clear, actionable steps towards achieving our vision. Unlike other strategies, this is not time-bound, as it lays the foundation for change in partnership with the community. We acknowledge that this work is complicated and messy, requiring a principle-based approach guided by frameworks and process. Today, we are sharing how our service will begin executing the race-based data strategy, allowing it for it to grow and adapt. Our strategy document outlines our vision, our mission, and our guiding principles. These 10 principles are informed by lessons learned, community engagement, and the expertise of other police services and organizations. Each principle has been reviewed with our community advisory panel, which has challenged us to define what we mean and how we are going to apply this in the work that we do. I'd like to highlight a few for this presentation. One, data privacy and protection. We will prioritize privacy, confidentiality, and security of individual and community information. Inclusive methods. Collection and interpretation must encompass a lens that appreciates the nuances of data in this space. Careful considerations will be made to understand deficit reporting, history, and best practice in interpretation and communication. Actionable insights. The goal of this strategy is to inform policies and practices aimed at dismantling structural inequities. Action planning must be developed in concert with community. This strategy, as we've mentioned, is supported twofold with both internal and external contributors to ensure effective execution. Internally, we have about a 20-person project team that will provide policing expertise from across the organization, from our comms to our courts to our frontline patrol. Externally, we have our CAP and community partners, and these groups will help make recommendations on changes to practices and training. Collectively, this group plays a key role in the planning and executing of the strategy. To further strengthen the strategy, our service has also invested in dedicated analytical support. This role extends beyond spreadsheets, encompassing policy analysis, environmental scanning, and advanced statistical techniques. In 2025, our service hired Daniel Mosneff, a computational social scientist with degrees from McMaster University, University of Edinburgh, as well as doctoral studies at Western University as a social scientist and Humanity Research Council doctoral fellow. Daniel has already contributed to shaping this strategy by developing analytical frameworks that will be used to identify factors that may be contributing to disproportionalities or disparities. In the following slides, we will talk more about the CAP, but we cannot overstate the value of their diverse perspectives and meaningful impact that they played in the work to date. Finally, Hamilton Police is committed to collaborating with external policing agencies and legislative bodies. We have actively participated in engagement sessions as contributors with the OACP and as learners from our peer services, some of which are in the room today. While there is no established playbook for this work within our sector, we are committed to leading by example, helping guide smaller agencies and paying forward the mentorship that we've already received. As mentioned, there is no playbook that guarantees a reduction in disparities within policing. However, academic research and leadership organizations such as the OACP offer valuable guidance on considerations and best practice. We know that from our past learnings that adapting content from other services is not necessarily going to work within Hamilton. We need a made in Hamilton, flexible, principled approach to dismantling our role in system inequities. The next few slides will introduce an implementation framework that will guide the how. We will identify, monitor, and address disparities and bias within our system. There are many ways that police interact with the public, but we're focusing on the areas that have the greatest impact on community trust. One of the key goals of the RIBD strategy is to identify and analyze specific interactions where disparities may exist, ensuring that findings lead to informed decisions and improvements in policing practices. To guide this work, we're taking a phased approach offered by the guidance of the OACP to start with high impact, high visibility areas such as use of force. We've chosen use of force for a few reasons. One, it's legally mandated for data collection, meaning that we already have structures in place to facilitate this. It's a high impact area where transparency is essential to public trust. And lastly, there has been consistent community interest and concern around use of force data and disparities. As we move forward, future priority areas will be determined through community input and internal review. The goal is to ensure that this strategy remains responsive to emerging concerns. Before we can analyze race-based data, we need a clear understanding of how the policies and practices shape police interactions. And policing, in Ontario, policing is guided by two key factors. One, legislation. So we're governed by the Community Safety and Policing Act 2019, which sets these broad legal requirements for policing. But we also have internal policies where each police service develops to ensure compliance and address their specific organizational needs. While these policies help structure police response, they may also unintentionally contribute to disparities, which is why reviewing them is crucial. For example, when looking at use of force, we conducted a deep policy dive to understand how officer interactions are guided by policies, how data on these interactions is collected and analyzed, how situational factors influence use of force reports. So we've talked about disproportions and disproportionality or disparity, and I want to review exactly what this concept means again for those new in the room. The Anti-Racism Act tells public sector organizations such as ourselves what analysis, at minimum, we have to do in order to identify and address systemic racism. For us, we are required to do this for use of force. Part of the strategy is to ensure compliance with those standards while also upholding our responsibility to transparently share these calculations and communicate their significance. While sometimes used interchangeably, disparity and disproportionality are separate concepts largely driven and influenced by the populations used for comparison. In order to better understand the differences, we will use this example to illustrate the difference and what it means. So 1, disproportionality happens when a group's involvement in something, like use of force, is higher or lower than expected compared to their share in a population. For example, if a group makes up 10% of the population, but represents 30% of the use of force cases, then that's an overrepresentation that requires further analysis. However, disparities look at differences between groups. It doesn't just compare the population size. What it asks is, are, for example, white individuals experiencing use of force at a different rate than Black individuals? To properly interpret these numbers and action any findings, we must use appropriate benchmarks or comparison points. Simply comparing police interactions to the general population may overlook contextual factors that may not be addressed by policing institutions alone. Instead, we can compare to arrest rates, types of police interactions, and other relevant data to get a more complete picture. In the 2023 Use of Force Technical Report, which looks at all use of force across Ontario, the Ministry of the Solicitor General stated that a lack of an appropriate benchmark population also remains a key limitation to calculating disparity or disproportionality. So I joined policing 4 years ago, and I joined with the civilian perspective, and I thought policing was very simple. You call 911, an officer shows up, and then the call is handled. But in fact, policing becomes much more complicated, which is why we have to take the steps to better understand the system and how it interacts. And I'll pass it over to Inspector Callender to walk us through what that looks like.
So I've been in policing for about 22 years, and this is more representative of how I know the system works. So what you can see here on in this subway map, as we like to call it, is on the far left-hand side here, you'll see 16 points of initial contact. And of those 16, only 3 are actually generated by the policing system. All the others originate from public. Many of the interactions begin with the police service, usually through reporting crimes or when the public is seeking assistance. The encounters will either start with an emergency response, such as a 911 call, or they may start through a proactive policing method, such as a traffic stop, a community event, or a neighborhood patrol. What we know here in Hamilton is that about approximately 80% of our calls for service are publicly generated, which can create a potential racial and socioeconomic disparity just in who the police interact with based on that stat alone. As we move to the right of the image, we can see in this image 38 additional points where an individual may have potential contact with the police service as the organization responds to that event. These contact points are shaped by procedural and policy guidelines, training, decision-making processes, all of which can be influenced by bias. If the bias exists and is left unaddressed, it can impact how the policies are applied, how discretion is used, and how individuals experience these interactions. The multiple touch points within the policing system highlight the need for a strong and sustainable strategy. Ensuring equitable service delivery across the various points of contact requires a comprehensive and intentional framework, one that incorporates tracking, measuring, analyzing, action planning, and then transparent reporting. We've shown this slide multiple times as well, and we're going to bring it back up here, and we're going to have a doctor who generated this speak to it in a video clip. But what we know about these drivers of disparity is that right now, researchers are using these four main factors to explain what can affect this disparity and disproportionality indexes between race groups and benchmark populations. So as you can see, it's officer bias, institutional and cultural practices, person's choices and actions, and social, economic, demographic factors. Understanding the drivers of disparity is a vital step in the collection of race and identity-based data, as it provides areas of focus for not only the police, but the community. As you can see, the top two squares representing the drivers are internal factors related to policing organization. The bottom two squares speak to external factors that may drive a disparity where a police organization, where our influence on that disparity is limited. And we'd like to take the opportunity to introduce these drivers to Dr. Kwesi Awasu-Bempa.
In policing generally, so for specifically, the literature would point to various areas that we can group into kind of four main areas. So officer biases, both conscious and unconscious biases that police officers might hold that would influence who it is that they decide to, for example, stop and search, how they treat those people during those stops and search, and for example, whether or not they decide to use force in a given situation, the nature of the force they use, how much, etc. There are institutional practices and policies, such as deployment practices, service-specific approaches to use of force that would, of course, as well influence racial disparities. There are the way in which the civilian or the member of the public interacts with the police as well, whether they're forthcoming with information, whether they're nervous and perhaps seem suspicious, whether they're evasive. These may be driven by a number of different factors, their previous experiences with the police, the nature of the police approach to them in the interaction, but how the member of the public, of course, is perceived and acts in their encounter with the police may influence how the officer deals with them. And we know, based on the literature, that there are racial differences in how people perceive the police and racial differences in how people deal with and approach the police in their interactions. And they, as well, may influence and inform these disparities. And then, of course, as well, there are choices made by members of the public and civilians around, for example, engagement in criminal activity. And I say these are choices that are made by them. We know, as a sociologist, that there are a variety of social factors that push people and pull people towards crime and certain types of crime. So when we look in the GTA, for example, and data from Toronto, it's young Black men, a very, very, very small proportion, but young Black men who are overrepresented in serious forms of street-based gun violence. And that has an impact, of course, on the police approach to dealing not only with confirmed offenders, but also other populations too. And so there are, needless to say, a multitude of factors that need to be considered in trying to understand the disparities that ultimately will be revealed here. This is part of what I'm trying to help the service understand and to develop a data collection and analysis strategy in order to fully comprehend and work further towards reducing those disparities.
So at this stage in this strategy, we want to focus on understanding why disparities might exist in use of force incidents specifically. So a key component of the RIBD strategy is ensuring that our data analysis, our future data analysis, is guided by the right research questions. So before we analyze any data, we need to know, what are we trying to understand? What disparities exist? What factors might be contributing to them? Essentially setting the foundation for meaningful analysis in the future. So this process, it actually started last week through discussions with our community advisory panel. The community advisory panel specifically, the CAP, is important in this context as they provide community perspectives, lived experiences, and insights that will help ensure that appropriate questions are being asked or being posed. So how do these question generation sessions look like? As I mentioned, our very first one was last week, and we'll have another one going into March. So we started with a large set of broad guiding questions to help structure the conversation for here specifically at the HPS. These questions were ultimately based on questions in existing reports. One important one for us is the Toronto Police Service use of force report, as well as in the academic literature itself. Recognizing that police use of force is a complex issue, it's not just a matter of officers' decisions. It's very important here, but we also need to consider potential situational stressors. We need to consider, as was mentioned, subject behavior, as well as any policy influences. So we can break the questions down into themes such as this, which we have on the slides here. We can ask, for example, questions with respect to representation. Who is involved in use of force and how does it compare to other populations? The nature of the use of force, for instance, are racialized individuals experiencing higher levels of force, situational characteristics, which I referred to, a question such as, does the level of force used changed based on the subject's perceived or actual possession of a weapon, potentially the call type, the behavior of the civilian, and other questions with respect to community characteristics, as well as the officer characteristics. These are not the be-all and end-all of the questions that we're asking, but merely a bit of a jumping off point for us to have conversations about the questions that we want to answer in the future. So taken all together, by working together with the CAP especially, we ensure that we're not just collecting data and analyzing disparities without any direction. We're asking questions to understand the deeper context behind these disparities. The idea is to consolidate CAP insights into testable research questions and use this framework to guide any future analysis, policy discussions, training strategies, as well as any long-term action. So what about the data itself? Once we have our guiding questions, we need to make sure that we have the right data to answer these questions. And to understand disparities, especially in use of force, we can think of multiple sources of where this data can come from. So right now, the HPS collects data from a variety of different sources. In terms of use of force, there are three that come to mind. First is incident reports. So these are the officer reports with key details about interactions. The second of which being dispatch records. These can track the types of calls, response times, officer involvement. And lastly, and what is key for use of force is use of force reports. These are the main sources of data when it comes to use of force incidents. These are required documentation that are filled out by officers explaining when and why and a number of other pieces of information regarding incidents of use of force. So to fully get at the questions that are being raised in the CAP process and in future iterations, we need to connect these data sources or even explore new methods of data collection. This could mean a number of things. This could mean linking data sources, so linking these data sources, which I just referred to. It may mean filling out reporting gaps where important details may not be captured. And overall, exploring additional data sources with community partners to ensure that we are getting the most accurate and complete information. This approach also aims to capture the lived experiences of equity-deserving groups and ensuring their perspectives are integrated within any analyses. So overall, by using multiple data sources and comparing them to different benchmarks, we can better understand disparities and ensure that our analysis is both thorough but also transparent. So when we have finalized our questions and once our data is collected, the next step is obviously analyzing this data to identify patterns, gaps, and also opportunities for improvement. As a lot of you can appreciate, there are many important parts of an analysis of this nature. There are a few things in particular that future analyses will focus on. Obviously, identifying racial disparities, the second of which being examining contributing factors to these disparities. As I mentioned before, comparing different benchmarks. How do Hamilton's numbers compare with respect to other services? And as I mentioned, community input. So the goal is that results from any analysis doesn't just speak for themselves. Rather, CAP members and community voices will help interpret these findings and shape recommendations. And the last bit for me is, in order to ensure a well-rounded approach, we need to think about research methods, and this is what Chloe referred to, the research methods that we use. A big part of this, obviously, is using quantitative analysis. And when I say quantitative analysis, I mean stats, I mean trends, I mean benchmarking in this regard. But we also need to recognize potential space for qualitative insights and capturing lived experiences, including but not exclusive to interviews and focus type techniques. So altogether, this analysis will be an ongoing process, but one that we hope is transparent with regular updates and opportunities for discussion. So what is the goal? It's to turn data into informed decisions that help shape policies, training, and community relationships going forward. So enough from me on the analytical bit. I'm going to welcome back to the stage Ala Mohammed, who is going to talk about our engagement with respect to this strategy.
Thank you, Danielle. Hi, everyone again. The engagement piece, you have probably heard Danielle and Inspector and Chloe talk a lot about CAB, our Community Advisory Panel. So at the start of 2024, the Hamilton Police Service started working on the race identity based data strategy to reduce racial disparities in policing. A key component of the strategy was the creation of CAB, known as the Community Advisory Panel, to provide a variety of community perspective. This started out as a call for application. Hamilton Police Services sent out an email and invite to all community members to apply for the CAB on February 1st, 2024. The call was directed at people who are passionate about data, social justice, and community service, particularly those who have worked in the field of judicial justice, human rights, race, and identity issues. Putting up a panel that represents Hamilton's diverse population was the goal and is the goal. The selection of the community review, all applications were examined by the selection committee, which was made up of 3 people from the communities that are overrepresented in the police use of force data, 2 civilian employees, and 1 academic partner. The final selection was selected 10 candidates to form the CAB following the formal interviews. These participants contribute a variety of backgrounds, including lived experiences from Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities, as well as backgrounds in social services, academics, and community organizations. The call out to the community. The initial call for the CAB, like I said, it was on February 1st, 2024. Hamilton Police Services encourage individuals who are passionate for social justice and relative experiences, specifically lived experiences. And we're assuring that the panel composition, authentic representation of the community at diversity, intersectional, and most important, you heard me, lived experiences. The initial meeting started on June 19, 2024, and ever since, the CAB members have been meeting every 2 weeks to offer continuous advice and input on the RIBD strategy, making sure that it supports fair policing methods and in line with our community requirement. The establishment of CAB highlights and aligns with Hamilton Police Services' commitment to transparency, accountability, and community engagement in addressing systemic issues related to race and identity in policing. Here are the names of our community advisory panel members. I see some of you here and some of you are online. Atika Khan, Cliff Van Der Linden, Hadaya Hassan, John Jacques Samwi, Gunena Parent, Kinsley Adu, Marlene Diamore, Natalie Starvin, Sheila Jamal, Yasmin Mirza, and I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong. Now I would like to call on Inspector Rashford and Staff Sergeant Hashimoto.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm excited to share with you the importance of the ongoing engagement in the RIBD strategy, a strategy that relies heavily on collaboration at all levels. Today, we're going to focus on 3 main pillars for driving this strategy forward. They're up on the screen here. First, let's talk about the Hamilton Police membership. Their active involvement is important to the success of the RIBD strategy. At the end of 2023, beginning of 2024, we hosted in-person sessions with frontline officers and the Hamilton Police Association. These sessions were an opportunity to share information about the RIBD strategy and highlight its significance, not just for our members, but for the broader community as well. To further support this effort in 2024, the RIBD internal project team was formed. Chloe had mentioned this. This team was made up of members both sworn and civilian from numerous units and areas throughout our service. Moving forward, this team will play a crucial role in keeping our members informed through meaningful updates and education. More importantly, they will work to build members' confidence in engaging with the recommendations set out by our community advisory panel. The internal project team also serves as a bridge, sharing insights and feedbacks they gather from our members, giving us valuable contextualized perspective to strengthen the RIBD strategy. Now let's shift our focus to community. We recognize that community voices are vital to the success of this strategy. True engagement means creating opportunities for individuals to share their expertise, diverse perspectives, and lived experiences. A key partner in this process is the CAP, which you've heard lots about. The CAP doesn't speak for the entire community. Their diverse viewpoints and community-focused lens provide us with meaningful contributions. They help ensure the RIBD strategy remains inclusive and reflective of the community we serve. Beyond the CAP, engaging with the broader community is equally as important. To keep community informed and involved, we will share progress and findings through public reports. These reports will outline actionable recommendations, implementation timelines, and next steps to our framework. So let's talk about how we keep lines of communication open. We're committed to ongoing communication through various channels, whether that's town halls like this, social media, the public reports, or other platforms. We've also launched a dedicated online platform to track progress and share updates on the RIBD strategy. This website serves as a centralized resource for transparency and public engagement. If you haven't already, I encourage you to explore the site, RIB website. If you're here in person, it'll be on the bottom left of the card. You can scan it, it'll take you to our site. If you're online, the QR code will come up at the end of the presentation. The success of this strategy hinges on the continuous collaboration between HPS members and the community advisory panel. Together, we are building trust, fostering active participation, and driving impactful change. And now I'm going to turn over to Inspector Rashford to talk about the last pillar.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I will now speak to the third pillar, which is partnership and collaboration. Oh, I need to. Yeah. I'd like to highlight the significance of how these connections drive meaningful change. The RIBD strategy is not a solo effort. It is built on strong partnerships with local institutions, organizations, academics, and community contributors. These partnerships play a vital role in helping us make informed decisions, tackle complex challenges, and align our initiatives with the real needs of the community. They also allow us to proactively identify risks, address gaps, and seize opportunities as they arise. But beyond that, partnerships strengthen three crucial areas, which are the community engagement, data analysis, and policy development. Community engagement fosters open dialogue and ensures community voices are heard and valued. Data analysis helps us to interpret data with context and accuracy to guide our actions. Policy development supports the creation of thoughtful, impactful policies that reflect both research and lived experiences. Why do partnerships matter? Let me give you an example of how these partnerships come to life. As Ala mentioned earlier, in January 2024, the HPS partnered with respected academics to guide the application and interview processes for the Community Advisory Panel, or the CAP. This collaboration was incredibly valuable, providing us with critical insights that allowed the RIBD team to better align these processes with community needs. It was a true example of how working alongside experts enhances both transparency and effectiveness. Additionally, we've worked closely with key partners like the Anti-Racism Directorate, the Ontario Associations of Chiefs of Police RIBD Working Group, other police services, and the City of Hamilton Community Engagement Team. These partnerships not only strengthen our internal strategies, but they also create a network of shared knowledge and resources. These partnerships have contributed expertise from academics, advocacy groups, and other agencies. Additionally, they can strengthen data analysis, policy development, and community engagement. It should be noted that the current partnerships are just the beginning. Looking ahead, the RIBD team is committed to expanding these collaborations. Our goal is to foster ongoing dialogue, seek diverse input, and co-create action plans to strengthen the RIBD strategy. We understand that meaningful progress only happens when we work with our community. Your voices matter. As we continue to build these partnerships, we also want to hear from you. Are there partnerships you feel are important and crucial for us to explore? We value your input, and so we please ask that you take a moment to identify any potential collaborators on your feedback card or through the QR code that has been provided to you. Your insights will help us grow our network, strengthen our approach, and ensure the RIB strategy remains both inclusive and impactful. And in closing, partnerships are the backbone of the RIBD strategy. By working alongside academics, community organizations, and government agencies, and by listening to community feedback, we can build a more informed, effective, and community-centered strategy. Thank you for being a part of this important conversation. Let's continue to build these relationships so we can drive meaningful change together. Now I'll bring Chloe and Jim back up.
So what? How will this information be used? The RIBD strategy is about more than just about collecting data. It's about turning that data into change. By using data to highlight disparities, track progress, and increase our accountability, the strategy aims to create a foundation for greater transparency, better informed decision-making, and more productive dialogue with our community. Internally, the RIBD strategy will guide decision-making to address systemic inequities by informing policy reviews, training updates, and resource allocation. For example, disparities in use of force data could highlight areas for improved training or policy reform, ensuring that our actions are grounded in evidence and purpose. We are here today to present a draft of our strategy ahead of our March 28th board meeting, nearly a year to the day since our first information session. Our community advisory panel has already begun generating questions, and we will be reaching out to the broader community to gather additional input on key priority areas. On March 11th, all documents will be released as part of our board process. This will include a comprehensive strategy document along with a summary version available in English, French, and Arabic. Finally, we have scheduled a report back to the board in June 2025 to provide an update on the execution of the strategy. This report will share findings and establish a regular reporting cycle for both the board and the public.
Through the RIBD strategy, we take an essential step forward, laying a foundation for a police service that serves every member of our community with fairness, respect, and dignity. The strategy represents a moment in our commitment to addressing these challenges and driving lasting change. While achieving equitable service may be a long journey, every meaningful transformation starts somewhere. Altogether, the RIBD strategy is not an endpoint. It lays the foundation for continued action. Insights from initial focus areas, such as use of force, will inform future phases, ensuring the strategy remains responsive to community needs. By embedding data collection and analysis into routine practice, HPS is fostering a culture of continuous quality improvement and positioning itself to contribute meaningfully to broader conversations about equity in policing. Ultimately, the strategy ensures that data becomes a tool for trust building, informed dialogue, and collaborative action, creating opportunities to strengthen relationships with the community and take steps forward towards a more equitable policing. Equity in policing is not just a goal. It is a necessity for building trust, fostering inclusivity, and ensuring justice for all. Thank you. So that was a lot of content and a lot of work. And so we want to take a moment. We want to take a moment to open up the floor for any questions that you might have about this strategy. A lot of the work that's been developed has been around the meaningful conversations we've had with community. And so there's a lot of nuances to the strategy that might not necessarily live in the document, but we'd be happy to have any conversations. And we do have somebody moderating online. Oh, we don't have somebody
We do,
moderating.
but no
Oh, we do. We have no questions online.
Evelyn?
Thank you. Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the presentation, very comprehensive, and I'm happy to have been a part of the selection of the CAP members. So one of the things I observed, I was thinking about here is how I would have liked to hear from the CAP members as a part of the reporting, just of course with staff support because they're mostly volunteering, mostly. And it would have been nice to hear their perspective to see how, with the limitations there in confidentiality and all of that stuff we talked about previously. But it might be something you want to think about for your future presentations. The other observation I have was around the measurements of some of the aspirational goals you have, driving meaningful change, developing the piece around developing trust. I think maybe we want to look at creating some metrics. What does that look like? So at the end of the day, we could say we have moved the trajectory from here to there. It might be as we move on the next series of meetings that you might have. So I think that's important. I recall reading something. It talked about all of us in this work. We do a lot of activities, but we don't see the change. So maybe how do we make sure that we are capturing some real change in your data collection as we build community relations? So those are just my observations. But thank you for this presentation. It's very helpful.
Thanks, Evelyn. If you're okay, I'll take a moment of time just to respond to a couple of those. We love your suggestion about having the CAP come up and speak as part of this work, and that's definitely something that will be under consideration. At this point, we're pretty fresh, 8 months into the work, but when we do go to board in June, that will be on the table for conversation to have their representation. As for indicators to measure the meaningful change, that is something we are trying to wrap our heads around. I think simply put, we can easily find metrics around disparity and disproportionality, and that's all rooted in the legislation. But what does that mean for community? How do you want to measure us? What does that look like? How do you measure trust? And so these are some of the conversations that we have to continue to have in the background while this work is ongoing. So thank you so much. And maybe we can connect offline about some of your thoughts on that.
Hi, just wanted to say great presentation. We're from Waterloo Regional Police and, just to see the strides you've made in the 8 months with the CAP is tremendous. We started our journey around the same time you did, and we haven't gotten to that stage yet. So just very interesting to see the engagement and, it is baby steps. For us who are in this work every day, 8 months is not even enough to scratch the surface to really dig deep on the prevailing legacy and the history within police services. So just congratulations to Hamilton Police for, the foresight. Your strategy is laid out really, really well. And I know we're going to probably take some of it. But yeah, I just wanted to say that. And, if the CAP members are here, one of the things that we have spoken about with Hamilton is just the importance of community engagement. And, when you look at all services in policing in Ontario have to do this, the leadership that some of the services have taken, like Hamilton and other services, has been tremendous in actually bringing the smaller services along as well. So thank you for having us today.
Thanks, Geraldine. It's true. We can't circumvent time, but it's definitely something that we are mindful of as we move through the work. We have an online question. Fantastic.
There are two questions online. First question, how can community leaders build partnerships with your team to leverage their expertise for training and practice change?
Sure. Such a great question. As I am new into my role as a community engagement lead, please reach out to me. You can find my email on the website, but it's amohammed@Hamilton Police. More than happy to meet and connect and have more conversation about our RIBD. Thank you.
Thanks, Ala. And further to that, I think it's about being transparent in the way that we are in this session, but around the work that we're doing with the CAP, I promise you, CAP, we will get to the point where we're showing real data and not talking about strategy, but it's about bringing that data back to our community leaders and rethinking the way that we process that information. Do they have any ideas? We're finding these system inequities. What can your services offer? How can we empower you? And those are some of the ways that we can facilitate the dialogue with our community leaders. So we are launching our strategy, but part of the goal and the engagement is to come back to those community leaders with the data to ask for partnership and how we can actually move some action forward.
So the next question, the question's less about the policy and reporting, but more so about how these changes actually affect boots on the ground policing day to day. Are there now changes in how police can interact with the public and offenders?
Sorry, Jack, how we can, how we are.
The question is how we can, but I think how we are would also be an interpretation of the question.
Yeah, I think it almost leads back to what Chloe just said there, because what we're working with now is data in the raw form, in the sense of what does that data mean, and we haven't got to that contextualized piece of how do we action that to our frontline boots on the ground service delivery models. So once we have the data, we get some context out of it, we utilize our community to give us that feedback, and to Chloe's point, almost to the last question on how does the community move our actions forward, it will, and that's what we assume is going to happen out of these practices, out of the strategy, is that it's going to change how we effectively police our community. So I think it's more of a future question out of this strategy, but it's definitely how we're going to move forward in the future of policing.
I will say that at the beginning of this journey, it's incredibly important to bring our membership along. They're the ones out there keeping our community safe. And so one of the key things that we did is we went around to their squads and we had conversations about this. And they said, yeah, makes sense. They also want a police service that's free of any system inequities that are contributing negatively to community. So it is a shared goal between both our membership and our community, and we'll be able to see any changes that happen boots on the ground once we start working through some of the process. Chair?
Oh, Chair?
Chair.
There you go. I'm Don Robertson, and I happen to be the chair of the Hamilton Police Service Board. And it's grateful to see so many people in attendance tonight and caring. I can't tell how many are online, as you can appreciate, but these are wonderful steps, and the initiative that the Hamilton Police Service are taking, and the team, and the wonderful job and the presentation you've done in less than a year, I think is absolutely incredible. It's nice to see it echoed by some members of Waterloo. And talking about a journey, you know, it kind of reminds me of a little baby laying on a blanket and just propping itself up with its arms and thinking about how it can get moving along. This is going to take a long time, but if you don't take that first initiative, nothing good is going to happen. And I can tell you, I think this initiative is absolutely wonderful. I think the group engagement will be very helpful. And I know it's important to our community to make our community feel more confident. And I think the great work is wonderful. And I'm curious if we could get if I could see a show of hands, how many police officers are actually here tonight showing interest? Thank you. That's good to see, and I'm glad Waterloo are here. And I know different police services will work together hand in hand in sharing data and trying to just make everyday life a little bit better and a little more comfortable for everybody. And I'm grateful for the team effort and the initiative that you're showing. I think it's great leadership in policing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I saw some questions and some hands over here. You can get a.
Hi, I'm Marlene Damois. I'm one of the CAP members. And just in terms of wanting to talk a little bit about sort of what the process has been thus far, and that knowing that given that we're from the community, part of our responsibility also and why it's taking a little bit longer to get to this question generating phase is that we also need to build our relationship with HPS, right? In terms of understanding who they are, what they bring to the RIBD initiative, and also all of our 10-member CAP group, we don't know each other either. So part of our challenge has been getting to know each other and understanding where our level of expertise is and how we can bring it to the strategy. So that's some of the things we've also been working on. We really appreciate that HPS, when we look at what our priority area is, being use of force, that we actually as a CAP experience a use of force day. So we went through the exact training that the police officers would go through to give us a good idea and perspective about what that means and some of the decisions and some of the in the moment things that police officers have to do. So it really helped us bring an awareness to some of the questions we wanted to ask and some of the data we wanted to be completed in the use of force form. So that was another piece that was really important to us. And I think from our perspective was eye-opening because at the end of the day, we ran through a scenario and we could just, if you were in one room and the scenario was happening in the other and you're like, oh my gosh, I wonder what's going on, what's happening, what am I going to do when I get there, kind of thing, right? So I think that was really eye-opening to lots of us. And if I recall, the first person that went and came back, we were like, oh my God, what happened? Oh my God, just looking at their face and stuff. So I think that was a really important and something to consider for the other services in terms of letting the CAP experience some of the things in the moment to give you perspective. And it also helped us. And I think as a group, we gave pretty good feedback about that day. So that's another thing to consider. And I think the other important thing is that we're also working out within our CAP about how we hold HPS accountable and the understanding that we don't speak for the community. We're sort of 10 individual people bringing our perspective and lived experience to the RIBD. And so I think, you know, those of you in the room and those of you online, in terms of if there's questions or things that you think would be helpful in terms of developing the strategy, to reach out to the CAP and reach out to the RIBD. And I think the QR code, you can send some of those questions because I think that's helpful. And I think it relieves the CAP committee of trying to think of all the possibilities. But no, I would say the CAP group, we're asking lots of questions. So I think for us, we're in the question generation phase, and that's really what we wanted to do. But also not to rush the process, because I think it's really important to get the structure and the understanding so then you can start asking those critical questions.
Thank you, Marlene. And other CAB members, you are more than welcome to share your experiences too.
Hi, okay. I have a bit of a niche question, and I can appreciate if you don't quite have an answer for that yet. But I think it was really interesting to get insight into the analytical aspect of the data collection. So my question's related specifically to the collection of civilians' characteristics and just the thought process behind that and how Hamilton Police Services is ensuring that the analysis of this kind of information doesn't lead to victim blaming.
That is a very, very good question. So just to unpack a few things about this. The first one is that form is actually mandated by the Solicitor General. So every year, not every year, most years we get a new form and all of the little data ticky boxes are all filled out, not filled out, but provided to us for us to fill out upon when a use of force interaction occurs. What we do know from working and talking with the Solicitor General is that they did involve the Anti-Racism Directorate. They did involve additional partners to think through some of the elements that they were collecting. Will there still be gaps? Absolutely. And that's kind of where, Daniel with his lens of analytics and analysis, and also with our CAPS, clear consideration for that, what I call those data nuances or underreporting. Those are things that we have to be mindful of. And so when we actually get down to the analysis phase, we can start unpacking, are we looking at the whole picture here? What kind of limitations are we working with? What kind of considerations do we need to have before we can make any conclusions or any, findings from the analysis? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
A great segue, because my question was also kind of about data. And in the work that I do, I really see the value back to community about qualitative data collection. Stories, narratives, and those are the components of data collection that often build trust more so than a survey. So what are the potential qualitative data methods, and how would you be determining them for kind of the next step in this plan?
Start answering this, and maybe I'll invite Daniel to fill in some additional stuff. So when I say that there is no playbook, there is no playbook for this. And so part of what we need to do is find answers to these questions. What we're presenting to you is just this framework, right? We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. When we start to get into living some of the principles that we're talking about and embedding them into the work that we're doing, that's where we're going to have to go back to the research. How have others done it? How have they done it in other industries? A community, what does that make sense for you? And then our community advisory panel also acts as a soundboard to some of these ideas. And, we do have a researcher on our board. And so we will be leveraging a lot of their expertise to help guide us in that direction. Daniel has nothing to add. He has some homework. But essentially that's what we'll be doing in order to fill out those pieces. So I wish I could say we're going to do this, we're going to do this. But again, I know what our approach is going to be. I don't necessarily know what the answer is. And the truth of the matter is that in that space, it really is what the community wants, not what we want. So.
I have a question. Your strategy, does it have a unique strategy around working with Indigenous communities? Because there are some components that, no collection without us, that's about us. And I think, there is a movement even within health to ensure that the voices of the folks who you are collecting data of, and I think that's where some of the other questions were going, are deeply rooted in owning it, because the issue around social demographics, that can actually be re-traumatizing, as I think other folks said. And I know you said, you don't have all the details worked out, but that's when relationship building with the community is so important, and having a CAP is really great. And they're speaking from lived experience, but not for the whole community. So how can you ensure that you are constantly engaged with the communities, whoever they are, and how are you identifying them, particularly the folks who might be critical of the data? Because it's often great to listen to ourselves when we like what we see, but how are you going to ensure that we are allowing the community to own the data that's about them?
So there's a couple things to respond to that question. The first one is that we're trying to build a strategy that's about race and identity, inclusive of all the different intersectionality that one can show up with, right? However, we also acknowledge that with Indigenous data that we need to be more mindful of that in the history behind data collection when we're working with individuals. And so I'm not an expert. There's a lot of room for me as an individual to learn more about Indigenous data collection. But the OACP has done a lot of work in this space already to get to a place where they've acknowledged that we actually need an Indigenous strategy for data collection separate and aside from the one that we're currently working on. So behind the scenes, that is being worked on. But again, we don't want to leave people behind. So the things that we're doing should be inclusive of creating that equity and policing for all. But we do acknowledge that there is some acknowledgement around Indigenous data that we have to be mindful of as we're working through. We do have representation of on our CAP from somebody who does identify as being like Indigenous, and we'll be able to leverage her. But I will be honest, we're probably going to get it wrong. This work is messy, and when we do get it wrong, we are committed to adapting and changing. We could go back in time and see a bunch of things that we could have done a little bit better and differently. But having had that question posed tonight, we'll think of some more different strategies and reach out to our community partners. There's a lot of stuff separate and aside from this work right here. We have our chief here who can maybe even talk about Circle of Beads and the committed relationship that we have with our Indigenous groups. Those are different streams of avenues that we can use in order to bring in community as part of these interconnected pieces of work.
Just to add to that, just quickly, I'm not Indigenous, but I do work at the legal clinic, and one of the things that we clearly hear from the Indigenous community is to go slow, and the idea that we need to get moving has been one of the criticisms, because relationship building is first. I'm not saying stop what you're doing. I'm just particularly pointing out Indigenous communities. There's different laws and different aspects, that pertain to Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit communities, and they have different laws, that also. So I think you should figure that out before you start collecting data, and make sure that you get the approval of the community before you start to go forward. Just saying.
We have another online question. How will the race and identity-based data collected be used to create tangible, measurable improvements for Black communities, particularly in areas like housing, justice, and healthcare? And how can our community be involved in shaping those solutions?
Well, I think we have to trust in this process. I can't tell you what's going to be tangible without making a promise that I'm not in a position to make. But what I can talk about is our commitment to doing this. I think nowhere in the research does it say why. I think we know things that have contributed to why there are certain disparities. And so my perspective is that in order for us to tangibly fix something, we have to understand the why behind something is changing or something's driving that. And so I'm hoping that this process will bring to light the process that we're going to take and bring back that data back to community, because we need them to also help inform what that action plan looks like. Without them.
Before you, I know Carolyn wants to have a word too.
Yeah.
I want to touch on part of the question that talks about how does it affect housing, healthcare, other massive systems in society. So when I showed you 32 points of contact, talk about 3,000 points of contact and how one system feeds another system. But we have to harness our system as best as we can, and then provide that data to those other systems and see how they intersect. And that's why we have our partnerships within Ontario as well in the policing system. Like we're one service in Ontario. So we need to be able to feed other systems in the same field, and hopefully we have the other bigger systems such as healthcare, such as housing, social services. All those systems are also facing the same hurdles. We off the get-go, when we first launched our RIBD a year ago, right away healthcare in Hamilton, they came knocking and be like, "What are you doing?" And so they're interested, and they're trying to figure out how they also engage and get data collection, and how they make it available and useful within their own system, whether or not we intersect or not. They're interested in it as well.
I think the last thing I'll add is something that came up during one of our sessions was one of the CAP members said, well, what do we do if we find areas where we want changes to be brought forward, but it's not police related? And we said, please make those recommendations. And what we will do at the end is figure out where they need to go. Right? We're not relegating the information that they're sharing with us to just policing. We recognize that that's our bucket, but certainly if there are recommendations that come out of that we think need to go to other agencies and other organizations, we're willing to do that. And I think that that's where you see the power of community speaking. So we're willing to share those changes with whatever organization we think it belongs to.
Chief? Nothing.
So that might be first.
Yeah, well, all right. Chloe?
No, I just want to say thank you very much. And thank you to our CAP members for being in the audience today. Thank you for everyone in the room taking time. Time is one of the most precious commodities that we have, both online and in person, to listen to the session. I wish we had every single answer under the sun and that we'd be able to map out and chart out this big, beautiful pie in the sky vision that we're going to achieve in a time bound of 5 years. But again, it's messy work, it's complicated work. And I also want to thank the community for coming back to this, because this is challenging. And I want to say thank you for that.
Well done. Thank you, everybody.